Well, hello and welcome to the porch. Good to see everybody. I'm Sierra and I'm joined by Amy and Rob, and we are Painted Porch Strategies. And we are coming right at you today with another one of our lessons from a handbook for new Stoics. So in case you've never seen what this is a really cool, accessible book. It's written by Massimo connect me if I'm wrong.
Pigliucci, yep.
Pigliucci and Gregory Lopez. And they give us a week by week, so 52 weeks in a year, there's 52 lessons. They give us a week by week a lesson that we're working on, and then they have us apply it to our real life, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to apply these principles into our everyday life. And that really is the challenge, is how can we be stoic in a world beyond our control? And isn't almost everything beyond our control? And for a refresher, what is within our control?
Our thoughts, our behaviors, our actions, basically anything within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So Rob, does that mean that we can control what other people say and other people do?
As unfortunate as the answer is no. You cannot control what other people will say or how they will react to whatever it is you say. You can only control how you say what you say.
Okay, well, at least we've got some clear boundaries here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so for those of you following along in your readers, we are on page 167, and this is week 28. And the lesson for this week is called Put the Sage on Your Shoulder. So in Put the Sage on Your Shoulder, we start out with a quote by Seneca in his letters to Lucilius. And he says, we can get rid of most sins if we have a witness who stands near us when we are likely to go wrong. Essentially, they want you to choose somebody who you admire, a quality, somebody that you find to be virtuous, somebody that you want to be like. And this could be a real person. This could be somebody that you know. This could be somebody from history, or this could even be a religious or mythological character person, however you want to say it. And they say, you can never straighten, Seneca says, you can never straighten that which is crooked unless you use a ruler. So a famous example is, what would Jesus do? People ask themselves that question. Or what would Buddha do? Or essentially, you're going to picture this little person that you admire, or this like a little sage on your shoulder. Now, for me, I focused on I think of Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio, and I know you guys are Disney fans, so I know you get this one. And ironically, JC, Jiminy Cricket, Jesus Christ, I think that was on purpose that they did that too. But he's essentially focusing on, that's your subconscious, that's the voice in your head. But Jiminy sits on Pinocchio's shoulder and is like telling him in his little ear, Pinocchio, do you think this is a good idea? Do you think that Geppetto would be mad about this? You know, so they want you to picture whatever this sage, this ruler that you want to measure yourself up against, as somebody that's in your ear and it's giving you some gentle feedback, is giving you information. Mm-hmm. So first, I would like to know what you guys think about the concept.
I love it. I think it's great. It kind of goes back to several weeks ago. They introduced this concept in a very high level, just thinking about individuals that you admire, and in certain situations, thinking about, what would so-and-so do in this situation. But I love how they took it and they expanded it once more. And it's not so much as just a reference of what would Jesus do, what would Buddha do, what would, George Clooney do in this situation. But it's actually pretending. It's not so much like the conscious on your shoulder or the good versus evil on your shoulders. It's more that witness. It's, would I do this in front of Jesus, Buddha, George Clooney, right? So would I behave this way if they were standing next to me or sitting on my shoulder, or I was in the same room with them? How would I behave differently? And so I think that's a great thing. I loved what Seneca said about you can never straighten that which is crooked unless you use a ruler. And it's really using those those visualizations, those individuals, whomever they may be, to serve as your ruler to help straighten out when you might want to go astray. I love it.
I would add that it's what would they do as well. So, I mean, that's what kind of back to what Sierra said. So, you know, for me, it was going towards people that have dealt with insane amounts of adversity and came out stronger, in at least publicly never let the adversity get in their way. So that's what I pictured going through the week is, okay, number one, is this real adversity? Well, compared to my examples, which we'll get into in a little bit, no, it's not. So do I have the right to complain? Yes. Okay. We all have the right to complain, but would these people complain in this moment? Probably not. And it's a good reminder too of mental toughness, right? Because part of what I talk about in my course on Painted Porch Strategies, Master Your Message, is the language that you say to yourself is contagious. And the language that you surround yourself with, the people that you hang out with, there's a lot of complaints. You probably will find yourself complaining a lot because it's just, it's like anything else. You hear it, you'll end up doing it. So that's one of the things I tried to work on in 2020 was to try to get away from minor grievances, which we talked about in this book as well. So it's like, again, what I love is how they put all these things and they all come together for us. Very smartly done. It's Maglio.
Like we say, it's like they knew. It's like they could somehow, I'll say, predict a little bit that things might not always go as we want them to.
Also unfortunate. But that's what makes life fun when you think about it.
That's true, because if everything goes your way and you roll with everything without a skip of a beat, then essentially you have nothing else to learn, right? I know Amy and I, we love a show called The Good Place. And once you really get into The Good Place, you realize in the show that all these characters, they kind of like, they reach a point where they've sort of done everything that they want to do. Well, as Stoics, if we think of everything that happens, everything that goes wrong as an opportunity to grow, to become more virtuous, then it's like everything is an exciting opportunity. And we've never stopped growing. We're never like, yep, I'm perfect, I'm done, peace. It's just never really going to happen. Always room to grow.
There's a great book. It's very small. It's called Mastery. It's by a gentleman named George Leonard. And for those of you who aren't familiar with George Leonard, he was one of the co-founders of Esalen, which is a wellness center in Big Sur. And his book, when he talks about mastery, was essentially boils down to a true master never hits the summit. The true master is always growing and always learning and always improving. You never truly hit the peak of mastery, because once you do, you're right. It's basically like, all right, well, then I guess I'm done. It's a similar thing as you talk about, Rob. You use sports as an analogy a lot, and you talk about somebody like
Tom Brady
Jordan, or
sorry.
Tom Brady too.
Yeah,
but you talk
Michael
about
Jordan,
someone like Michael Jordan or LeBron James, or even Tiger Woods. Yes, they were born with a certain amount of natural talent, but how they mastered or how they aimed to become masters of their sport was through a lot of work. They didn't just show up, swing a golf club and go, peace.
Even though we like to believe that that's how it happens, right? Yeah.
He works on it. They work on it repeatedly and consistently, and probably for many of us, a lot more than we dedicate to fill in the blank. So.
There was
they even say Carnegie. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? With practice.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just one of those things you got to do in order to make a change, in order to learn, in order to get better, in order to become the master of your domain, you do have to do the work. I mean, there's no shortcuts, unfortunately.
Mhm.
We all wish there were shortcuts in the technological age, like, okay. But now it's interesting because in the modern day, there are many more distractions that can pull you away from focused work.
So, to temper those distractions, who would be your sage, Rob?
To temper distractions?
Yeah.
Man. So I don't know if I can answer that question directly with these.
Put you on the spot, sorry.
Yeah, well, just in that context, right? So one of the things I had an opportunity to go on a friend's, he's doing like a mini talk show, something he calls Mental Notes. And after I was done with doing that interview, I went right to Dr. Martin Luther King's comparison, because he was so clear in what his messaging was. There was no mistaking what he stood for. There was no mistaking what he said. So that is one of the go-tos that I run through a lot, because I do a talk show during the day on the radio. So I want to make sure that when I have an idea, I express it clearly. I express it in such a way that it is welcoming to all. Like Dr. King's message was intended to be for everybody, not just for Black people or minorities or for just white people. It was, we can all be better. I challenge us to be better. Here are the words that are written in our founding documents that everyone says they love. Let's use these words to be better.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the examples. And you think about the adversity that Dr. King obviously lived his life through, with constant death threats, eventually leading to his assassination in 1968. He was very reluctant to lead the movement because he knew taking on the task was monumental and it wasn't going to be easy, but he eventually decided to do it anyways. And then, and you listen to, I've been to the mountaintop. There's so much in that speech that seemed to me to be acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
that this is his purpose. And even in it, he kind of has some dark language. He's like, I don't know what's going to happen from here. But it was almost like foretelling that his life would end shortly thereafter. But he never shied away from that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to speaking with purpose, he's my go-to.
All right.
I shot right for the stars on that one. I mean,
You
but yeah, if you
did.
want to be the
You
best,
did.
you gotta find the best
That's
examples.
true. It's very true.
Right. So Amy, who did you use for your sage, or there, we could have chosen several to give us one of your examples.
So I have two. One of them is you, very often. Especially when it comes to things like patience and acceptance and just going with the twists and turns that life can present. You are one of the people that I channel, because I think about how you would handle this particular adversity or obstacle. And so you are someone that I definitely use as my sage to help remind me, what would Sierra do in this situation? She would probably find a way to turn the lemon into limoncello, as we like to say. But then also the other person that I did point out was one of our Stoic buddies here, Epictetus. And I chose him specifically because he's kind of a funny guy. I appreciate his matter-of-fact humor. For a quick history, Epictetus, as one of the original Stoics, he was a slave. That's actually what his name means. His name means, I think, to be owned, is what Epictetus means. So he was a slave, and then he eventually became free. So for him, he had a very different perspective and outlook on the way things are, or the way things will be, than, say, a Seneca, who was extremely wealthy. And very much, Seneca was one who gave himself good advice, but didn't always take it, which is what most of us do. But he was a very wealthy man. And then Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor of Rome. I feel like Marcus was very hard on himself all the time in his meditations. His meditations, if you read them, it's very much like, stop being dumb, don't do this, do this. And it's very good. It's good advice for all of us, because sometimes we need that reminder. Seneca's more of like the aspirational, be amazing. And Epictetus is like, well, you know what? Things are going to go wrong. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. So I really like Epictetus because he has a humor to him that I think I need to infuse more into my life, especially when it comes to things that frustrate me or adversities that I bump into, is to be able to just look at it for what it is and find a little bit of the humor, or, you know, the how I can brush it off and not let it get to me. So those are the two that I have.
Well, thank you for that. I'm flattered to be in company with Epictetus too.
Mm-hmm.
I because I can't speak for Epictetus. He's not here, unfortunately. He passed away more than a few days ago.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
It's been a minute. I'm a human, and so believe it or not, I still struggle with it. And there are days that I feel that my patience is not where it could be. When I'm able to step back, and the sage on my shoulder that I chose to work with is Buddha. And the reason why I chose Buddha is because a lot of the Buddhist teaching have to do with non-attachment, which is very similar tied into the Stoics, in that if I can unattach from outcomes that I can't control, if I can unattach from things other people do, outside influences, then it makes it easier for me to only focus on the things that are within my control, and perhaps to not stress about the things that are not really worth stressing about. So that's what I think of. And I also think about in Buddha, so in Buddhism, there's something called the Eightfold Path, which is their kind of regulations, or, you know, the virtues of Stoicism. But I love the idea of the path, because when I think of the path, it reminds me that every person has their own path. So when I become frustrated with what somebody else is doing, I just have to remind myself that I have to allow them to be on their own path, and it might be different than mine.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
So when you're thinking about a situation, how do you go to, in your example, Epictetus? Do you have
what's your trigger? What's your
implementation? Epictetus notes, or Sarah, do you have your Buddhist teachings, and do you say, okay, I need 5 minutes to run through my Buddhist teachings when I run up against adverse situations?
That's a great question. I don't currently have like a go-to, I'll say, sage checklist, if you will. I get what you're saying. I don't have anything like that. It's more of the channeling of the behavior versus necessarily a certain regimen of checkpoints, right, to go through to try to emulate the sage. But that's a great question. I think that's actually something that would be a great piece to incorporate, is because they are really big on tying it to a habit, tying it to a trigger. So that way, when it does happen, you don't have to find the recollection. The recollection is adhered to it. How about you? Do you have one?
One of the things I do, not enough of, but I do like to go back and to listen or read certain speeches from Dr. King, to use that example. The other examples, again, they're mostly people that dealt with, as I used the term, insane amounts of adversity. So Nelson Mandela's another one, who's put in jail literally because of the color of his skin. He was in jail for, I think it was 27 years. And what he used that 27 years to do was how to figure out how to communicate with the other side. So the apartheid South Africa. So he said, okay, how can I become a leader when I get out of here? And when he got out, he stepped into that role automatically, and he became the president, first Black president of South Africa in 1994, if my memory serves me correctly. Who does that? Who gets thrown in prison for being the wrong color of skin, right? And who doesn't stew and get angry? Nelson Mandela. That's who. Reuben Carter's another example. They called him the Hurricane. He was a boxer who was wrongly imprisoned. I think it was for a double murder he never committed. And I was just reading Ryan Holiday, another Stoics book called The Obstacle is the Way. And he talked about Hurricane Carter in that book. And he says he knew that when he went to jail, the one thing they couldn't take away from him was his mind. And he didn't let it.
Yeah, and you said in his mind, he knew he wasn't guilty,
Yep.
so he didn't behave as if he was.
And he took the
So he didn't let
19
it
years
corrupt
in
him.
prison, yes, to learn to read law books, to work on his case. And he came out and he didn't accept any pity. He didn't accept any money. He just, boom, got back to living.
Yeah.
Like, that's character.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
mental strength.
Well, it's so much, it ties into so much, Sierra, like what you talk about in your radical mindfulness program, when you think about your past is not your present. And I think that's a huge component, because you can and the past can be 5 minutes ago. It's not the things that happened 20 years ago. It can be the thing that just happened, but not stewing or letting what happened prior, the thing that is out of your control. You cannot change it. It's already happened. It's done,
Yeah.
And being able to separate that and say, this was my past, but in my present, thinking about this, in my present, what would Buddha do? What would Nelson Mandela do? What would Epictetus or George Clooney do?
And
I don't know.
by
He's apparently on my mind today.
by only being present with it, it really is the ultimate forgiveness, right? Is that if you can let go, whether you've received an apology or reparations, or how, whether it's been made right or not, to be able to only be present, that's like the greatest gift that you can give yourself. Yeah. Because then you're not tied to whatever is in the past. You can choose to move forward, like the man who was wrongfully imprisoned and got out and just, I'm moving on. I'm not going to be hardened by this. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn. And then when I get out, I'm moving on with my life. And for so much of us, we get stuck. Rob talks about in his course about the story. Just don't get stuck in the old story. Be ready to be in this story right now and write a new page and make a new choice.
And I think that's good. I think it's key to point out with this too. This is not meant to be a reflective reprimand, if you will, right? So it's not to say, oh, I should have behaved like so-and-so. I should have behaved more like Buddha. Bad me. All right, well, I guess I'm not, I guess I'm not going to get any better, right? As opposed, it's really meant to be that in the moment, channeling that sage, have them be on your shoulder, channeling them and doing your best. That's really all this is trying to do, is do your best, be your best. Everybody, it takes practice, but continuing to practice your virtues and having a good character and being a good person, those are the ultimate goals that we're trying to achieve.
They do take practice. That even takes practice.
Oh yeah, it takes a lot of practice.
And that's the part, because we have our natural reactions, we have our automatic negative thoughts, we have all these things that our body does to help us survive, which Sierra talks about in her course quite a bit as well, that work against you in the conventional sense. So if we were still running around and we were the weak species, I was just reading something that when humans first came out, we were less than 5 feet tall. We were like very weak. So we evolved to not have to run around and be chased by tigers anymore. But at first it was like everything. We're like, what? I didn't even know what to eat. Will I die if I eat this? Is that animal friendly, or is it going to eat me? So it was this constant need for that survival that we have built a nice society where on a typical day that doesn't apply to most people. Some it still applies to, obviously, but for most of us, it does not. So you still have those old, things from the past that haven't evolved as fast as we humans have, that you have to fight against. That's what takes the practice.
It does. Well, and assessing where it needs to be at, where does your stress response need to be? If you're literally in a fight for your life, if there is a bear that is about to attack you, then you do need all of that stress response, because it warrants it.
And that's what we say, what would Bear Grylls do, right?
What would Bear Grylls do in that situation? Or, what would Steve Irwin do? But if you can back out and say, I'm really stressed about something that already happened, the outcome is already done and I'm wasting all this energy on, and I'm getting all worked up. My shoulders are coming up. My breath is tight. My jaw is tight. Do I need this much of a response? Or do I need to just focus on what's right in front of me and move forward?
Mm-hmm.
And knowing the difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Practice makes not perfect.
Progress.
Progress.
I love this too, because the idea of this book is to help you practice become a Stoic.
Mm-hmm.
And it does too take practice, because you're learning new things. You apply these little lessons each and every single week that help you progress along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed a big difference in the 28 weeks for me and how I just handle everyday nuances, I'll call them. Whether they're adversities in traffic, whether they are minor things that come up at work or personality strifes that you got to deal with, all of these lessons have helped me become more sage-like.
Yes. We're more than halfway through. And now Amy has been studying Stoicism, I think the longest out of the three of us. How has the journey been up to this point for you, Amy, with this book in particular?
You know what? This book, I think, is a perfect tool for anyone, regardless of where you're at in your learning. Because having studied Stoicism in the past, a lot of it, traditional books are a lot of theory or just the philosophy of it. They talk about what it is they believed, what they did, how they behaved. Whereas this is such a great little mini practical ways of how you can take those philosophical ideas and apply them in the real world, which is very rare with philosophy. But that's one of the great things about Stoicism, is they say it's basically philosophy for the real world. And it really, I think that I've learned so much more. It's helped build from that baseline, just conceptual understanding of what Stoicism is and what their philosophical beliefs were. And this has now taken it and rooted it more deeply into the way I approach each day or each circumstance much more.
Yeah. Well, and that's another way that Stoicism itself is different, is that to gather on the Painted Porch, which is where we are, what we were named for, is the Painted Porch was a place where anybody could join, a slave like Epictetus, just a street sweeper, a king, anybody could join and discuss these ideas, because the human condition is the same no matter your station in life. Mm-hmm. Things go wrong, you get upset, doesn't matter.
You deal with
more money, more problems.
Exactly. Exactly. When there's people, there's conflict. It's just natural. We don't all have, as you talked about, Rob, we don't all have the same worldview. We don't all have the same experiences. And so because of that, each of us have different beliefs and behaviors, and, being able to effectively navigate them, not tiptoe around them, but to be able to navigate through them in an objective but virtuous way is the ultimate goal of what we're trying to do here. And we're not trying to,
it doesn't matter,
we're just trying to improve ourselves.
And it doesn't matter whether you're interacting with people in person or online, or even to Amy's major frustration lately is technology. Which is built by people.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah, I'm seeing a common denominator here, which is
people.
So, Amy, I would love for you to repost the link on where they can find this book, Handbook for New Stoics. I'm going to have her do that when she finds a spare moment. And I would love for you, if you're not a part of our book club, to join us. You can really jump in anytime. And next week, we will be back with week 29, which is Review Your Actions Nightly.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a highlight reel.
It is a little bit. It is a little bit of that. The evening reflection. It's a very handy tool. Mm-hmm.
Well, very good. Any closing thoughts here on the porch about week 28? Anything we didn't cover or you want to discuss?
I think the key here, which I love that you pointed out, Rob, was not simply just identifying the situation and thinking about, how would so-and-so behave? What would fill in the blank do? But also exploring ways to attach it to some sort of trigger. So that way going forward, it's something that you can easily recall, especially if you have a diverse set of people, because it's very rare that you're going to have one person that your go-to for every situation. But it's good just starting to go through and identifying in what situations, when I'm angry, when I'm sad, when I'm frustrated, when I'm, tired, when I'm emotionally charged, whatever it might be, being able to identify who your go-to might be, and then maybe just taking a little time to call out some of their key attributes, because that's really ultimately what you want to try to do, is to use them as your ruler to that point.
Ruler.
Mm-hmm.
And George, what is
Practice
the
and George Clooney?
Yeah.
I don't know. He was just on my mind. He was just
Interesting.
on my mind today. I don't really know why, but you know what? I'm sure George Clooney has some nice attributes. Other than his face.
Well, did you guys find this exercise helpful? Give me a thumbs up if you did.
Yes. I think I don't think we've come across many that we've said, nah. I think there were maybe a few that were we didn't quite connect with as much, but the majority of them are definitely helpful.
Yes. And to your point, Amy, I like that they not only give us modern day references to what they could be talking about, but encourage us to think about even just small things. To practice Stoicism, it doesn't mean you have to lose everything in a shipwreck like Zeno. There's opportunities to practice these principles at any time. You just have to have the awareness to look for them.
Mm-hmm. And the great thing about this book is that they break it down in such a way that the awareness over time becomes natural. It's not something that you have to go find or dig into or do further research on. It's a very, very small ways that you can incorporate it.
Oh, very well put. All right. Well, crew, we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us for a Handbook for New Stoics, our weekly Stoic book club. See you next time.